Hi, I'm Gracie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumphs. In today's episode, I talk with TV host, journalist, activist, and entrepreneur Catt Sadler. We spoke about her upbringing in the Midwest, religion, ageism, gender pay disparity, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this intimate conversation we titled, Not Whole Enough. So just start by telling me a little bit about yourself and your upbringings, your beginnings.
Well, I'm from the Midwest, so I'm from Indiana, and my formative years were kind of split into two halves, really. Even though I was born in a very small town called Martinsville, Indiana, population probably 10,000 at the time, we quickly moved to Indianapolis. So I was in a more urban setting from the time I was about 4 until I was about 12 or 13. So I was in the city as far as Indiana standards go, living with my mom and my stepdad, and my brother and sister. And then we moved to Martinsville, which was a night and day experience when I was essentially middle school and into my teen years. So I remember, when I think about my childhood, it was especially those early years in Indianapolis, it was great. My parents divorced when I was 2, so I was never really that close to my real dad until I was an adult. So, but I think back fondly of those times. I was, I actually liked school. I was really social. I was involved in kind of everything.
Were you a popular girl? Sounds like you were a popular girl.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I didn't have feelings of loneliness. I had a lot of friends. I loved, it's, kind of the same thing. I talk for a living now. I really connected with people and all kinds of people. And it wasn't until later, that I think you learn about cliques and different groups and different identities and all of that. But I didn't really see that, or I wasn't maybe aware of that when I was younger. So yeah, I was just involved. I played softball. I was in dance. I had really supportive parents who encouraged me to pursue things. Yeah, it was nice. Things got a little more complicated when I got older. My family life was pretty dysfunctional, to say that. There's a guilt that comes along with even saying that out loud, but my mom's second marriage was pretty tumultuous, and, there was some addiction in our household. And so we were in and out of phases of what felt like crisis, in my teen years. So that was difficult. But, I remember during those trying times, when the home life was pretty tumultuous, I remember that's when I went through a phase where I really turned to religion, and I was very religious in high school. Yeah, I was hardcore Christian. I was going to Bible studies before school. I mean, I was that girl, but that was kind of my saving grace, I think, in many ways through those tough times. I really turned to my church family, and that was, helpful. It was.
That's really interesting. I would love to unpack that a little bit more. Well, first of all, do you consider yourself very religious now as an adult?
No, not at all. And isn't that interesting? No, I was raised, again, we were mostly in the small town in my latter, adolescence, I guess. And so my mom was, let's go to the Methodist church on Sunday. That's kind of what everybody did. And I was religious, but then I think as I got older, I guess I questioned religion a lot more. It helped me out in a moral sense. And like I said, in a familial fellowship type of way. It was very, very good for me. But then I started to study. I started to see the world. I started to ask more questions. Then it was, people would ask of me, well, why are you a Christian? And I couldn't really answer that. I had to go, well, I wanted to know, what do Buddhists believe? Some people don't even call Buddhism an actual religion, but I started questioning, why do people believe what they believe? And so I still to this day don't think I have all the answers, but to answer your question, do I think I'm religious? No. Am I spiritual? 1,000%.
That's so interesting. So I went to 12 years of Catholic school.
Oh, wow.
And and with that, you have religion class every year. and you have to go to church every week with the school, and then you're also expected to go to church every Sunday. And, I grew up in New York City, so going to Catholic school was way more about getting a better education because so many of the public schools are not great in New York City, and less about the religion of it all. But being from a Latin family, Catholicism is a big deal, and my grandmother was super religious, and I kind of followed along in those footsteps. And like you, as an adult, I started to question the church and the Catholic Church, and in particular, and the things they believed and the things they were against. And then that made me pull away from the church. Not to say that I don't still believe in God or some kind of higher being, but I absolutely relate to that, like pulling away from the institution of religion.
Yeah. It's very flawed. I mean, it's like when you grow up and become an adult and then you find out all of these systems are flawed, and it's a real letdown. I mean, let me tell you, at this age in my life, I'm like, I was so naive, and I really always kind of weaved my way through life with these rose-colored glasses and seeing the good in everyone and really believing in people and things. And I don't regret that, but there is almost an awakening when you get older, and the more you know, the more you realize like these institutions are flawed and they're corrupt, and the greed, I mean, in everything, religion, we could just go across the board. So yeah, it's pretty eye-opening. It's hard to be so formally aligned with a religion, quote unquote, when, listen, it's a personal choice and everybody gets to decide for themselves. But yeah, for me, I didn't find it important, even once I had children, to make that a part of their upbringing at all.
Okay, so the stuff was going on at home. You turned to religion, and when you did that, was there a sense back then, now in retrospect, that there was something that you felt not enough of that the religion maybe fulfilled for you?
Well, back then, and I don't even know if this answer it fills in the blank correctly, but the word that just popped in my mind was not safe enough.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I just got chills when you said that. Because that totally makes sense. If you're having this unstable experience at home and then reaching out to this religion, to this group of people who seemingly are taking you in with open arms, when you think about religion in its purest sense, it is like a community of people who are supposed to be there for each other and help each other and make each other feel safe. So that completely makes sense to me.
Yeah, it was like, running into the arms of something that felt like it was going to hold you and take care of you, the promise of that. I think that's, that's why I never would ever criticize anyone for turning to religion at any point in their life, because I do think there are certainly things about it that are helpful and that sustain people. I mean, I have a brother who actually, a lot of my siblings are quite religious. I have a lot of half brothers and sisters now. There are 6 of us, but my brother had some struggles without completely outing him, but he really turned to religion, and it saved his life in many ways. And a lot of people need that structure to kind of just sustain their day to day. And for that, I do love it and believe in it very much.
Wow. Okay. So now moving forward a little bit to fill the audience in. Yeah. So Catt Sadler, if you don't already know this, is a TV host and was on E! For a long time. Tell us a little bit about how you got into TV hosting and news and all that stuff.
Kind of like I already alluded to, I as a young girl, I really gravitated to conversation. I don't know if it's because I was in a small town and I always had a certain itch for more information, more knowledge, more people's stories. So I would not stop talking. My mother would tell you, like, I would talk really fast and I wouldn't shut up. But my intrigue, I think, turned into the people I looked to, I would say in my teen years, early 20s, was Katie Couric on the Today Show. I was really into journalism. I really liked watching her tell people stories. Then it became Oprah, who wasn't watching Oprah? And I just saw the power that she had with her microphone and the reach she had and the change she could make. So I was so in awe of her. I mean, I was that girl who was like glued to the TV watching Oprah every single day. And so when I studied, when I went to Indiana University, I really was all over the place with my major. And then it just, it was my mom who was like, who are you kidding? Why are you like taking so long? You're a journalist, broadcast TV. Like, what are you waiting for? Because at the time I was also in theater. I think you and I have a lot of that in common. I was in theater. I wanted to be an actress. I was in a band. I mean, I was in art. I loved the arts in general. But how do you make that a career, especially when you're like in landlocked Indiana, even pre-internet, right? So I'm aging myself, but like it felt like a much more limited space in a limited world. So I chose journalism finally I was almost a senior by the time I declared my major. And then the kind of rest is history. I mean, it really was just getting an internship at a local TV station in Indianapolis. And then really just like becoming on fire. I mean, it's like sometimes you have to take a lot of jobs to figure out what you don't want to do, but it was so immediate to me that once I got in that newsroom with like-minded people and like the chase of the story and the writing and the mostly connecting with just humans, of any kind, for regardless of the time, any story, I just was so turned on to the whole art of that from beginning to end. The editing, every bit of the process just turned me on. But I will say I was a general assignment reporter very early on in Indianapolis, and I was covering a lot of stories that did not make sense to me. I mean, I was covering fires and I was interviewing homicide detectives and I was doing some really dark stories. I was like, this is not me. This is I don't want to make a life of doing this. So, to make a very long story short, I was quote unquote discovered by an agent who happened to see me on TV from New York. I thought it was a big scam. I didn't call him back. And anyway, he was the first person, Ezra Marcus, to ask me when I was about 21 or 22, well, what do you want to do with your life? And no one had ever like given me permission. Like I would never just been point blank asked what I really would want if I could determine my life's trajectory. And by the way, of course we can all do that, but it never really dawned on me to claim it and then design it. And I just didn't have anyone really in my world that was pushing me to figure that out. And so I said, well, entertainment tonight, Hollywood, the bright lights. I could mix my love of movies and cinema and art and fashion and like, that can collide with telling stories. I mean, at the time, especially, that was so far and few between those kind of jobs. But Ezra and I decided we were going to engineer my career to try and get me there. And so that's kind of what happened. I left local news. I spent about 4 years in San Francisco doing more local news, but definitely geared to lifestyle and restaurants and fashion and entertainment. And I mean, we could be here all day, Gracie, but I married my college sweetheart, and then I had my first son, and then I moved back to Indiana, and after another, 8 years or something, or maybe not 8 years, no, 5 years, then at this point I had done local news for about 10, 11 years, and I just got the bug to go for the whole national bit on E. And so that's kind of couple auditions later, I ended up on E, and then my family moved. We uprooted our whole lives in Indiana and landed in LA, and that's how E happened.
I love that. I actually think you did a fantastic job of explaining that whole trajectory like so succinctly, but
okay, good.
It's crazy because I didn't realize how similar our backgrounds are. And yeah, absolutely. I also went to school for broadcast journalism after thinking I was going to school for business, all the while really wanting to be an actor, but feeling like I couldn't do that because I needed to actually make money. And we all know how hard acting is. And got a job right out of college at ABC News in New York. I went to NYU and hated it because opposite of you, when I was in that newsroom experience and I was working, I'll never forget, I was working overnight shifts. So I would go to work at 10, 11 or midnight and then work until the next morning. And everyone I worked with was just insane because of course they are, because they're working overnight shifts for years upon years. And we did the news for this show that no longer exists. It was called World News This Morning, and it was with Anderson Cooper.
I vaguely remember that, Gracie.
Do you remember that show?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. I mean, yeah, I was so on the pulse at the time of like everything that was on TV. I remember because
we're only a couple of years apart, so this is all happening around the same time. And then we did the news for Good Morning America. I did not like all the news portion of it, like the depressing news, the world news, what was going on in the world, what was going on in New York City. But I was very excited about the anchors and being on set and being with the lights and cameras and things like that. And so I left ABC News to go to MTV because, like you, I was like, oh, entertainment news would be fun.
We're so similar. That's wild.
And it's true because I loved the idea of talking to people and listening to their stories and getting to know more about them and being on camera. And so I worked at MTV for a while, but I fell into production, MTV production versus the news department. So then I started doing more producing. And it wasn't until later in my late 20s, early 30s that I started pursuing acting in LA. And now I love it. But going back to, storytelling and getting people's stories, now I feel like now that I've transitioned to writing, that's part of that, where I get to research and learn more about people and learn more about different situations. And now with the podcast, interviewing people in this sense, it does fulfill this hole that I feel like is missing from the journalism background that I have.
Isn't that so interesting, though, how you can kind of weave in and out of your career and your journey? You're not sure exactly. All the pieces somehow add up. And it's, everybody has a different route to how they get there. But it sounds like you also listened at least to that inner compass going, I think I need to pivot and maybe I'll go here and then I'll explore that. But then how it all kind of comes to fruition. And I love that you explored your acting in your late 20s, early 30s. I mean, to this day, my kids are like, why don't you just do it? To this day, if I still have any regret, it's that I didn't pursue acting more. It's what am I going to do? Start at 45,
Yes, you can start at 45, Catt Sadler.
I'll tell you, about 10 years ago, a friend of a friend, I mean, obviously we're in the business now, we're in the industry, so things come up all the time. And other than playing myself or playing a reporter or a journalist, I can't remember this guy's name. He's a director, British director. His name's Simon somebody. And he was like, you'd be perfect for this dramatic role in this independent film. And he's like, come audition. And Gracie, I went from having not done anything except for being Cinderella on the stage as a 14-year-old to auditioning for this full on leading female role. In the audition, the scene is she's having a full-on meltdown. So it's a full-on emotion-filled cry session, losing her mind. And I had no idea what I was doing. And it was so scary. And I did it. And of course, I did not get the job. But I think I was traumatized by, I went from 0 to 100 so fast. If I were to do it again, I think I'd need to take some baby steps because that audition was so embarrassing.
That's such a Hollywood story. I love it. Well, it's interesting because maybe that's something we can touch on. Because you just said you're 45, I'm 42, we work in Hollywood, and there is a lot of ageism in this town.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's something we can talk about, maybe not feeling young enough, because I feel like, oh God, the many times I was told. I mean, luckily, I think for both of us, and I will pat each other's shoulders on this one and say, we look quote unquote young for our age, because people have this perception of what someone in their 40s should look like. And it's not what most 40-year-olds, at least that I know, look like. But I think maybe if you want to talk on that a little bit.
It's funny. I never really thought of it as not young enough because I really do try to. I think we're almost forced to do the internal work to combat that because you're right. It's hit over our head our whole lives is look a certain way, especially in a visual medium. I mean, I think that's why I love podcasting so much. It's it's finally the visual piece. You can just put that over there on the table. It doesn't have to be a part of the exchange, which I love. I will say, I think I have more personal challenges with aging, more than I've actually directly experienced in the industry. Now, maybe that's my naivete again, where I haven't had a total confrontation where anyone said, you're too old, therefore you cannot. I know it exists. I mean, the facts are out there, but I can't say I've had one personal professional experience where it was you're not young enough. I try to lean into it. I really also, because so many girls and especially young girls follow me or look up to me or, my audience is so female centric that I really try to be more of an example. And yes, I'm lucky. You're lucky. We have good genes. I do injectables. I've never lied about that. I'm trying to salvage every bit of like radiance on my face that I have. And so we could unpack that. Why do I feel the need that I must do that? I feel better about myself. It's the same reason why I jog. It's the same reason why I try to eat clean. It's the same reason, I try to feed and nourish myself with things that make me feel good, not worse about myself. But aging is a bitch. I mean, I'd lie if I said it wasn't hard. So I do the work so that I can try and be an example of owning my number, owning, my experiences. I mean, bringing it back to Oprah. I mean, she said when she turned 50, she's like, if you lie about your age, you're really denouncing all of your life's experiences. And I don't want to do that. I mean, again, back to my just ignorance, I guess. People definitely lie about their age in our business. And I just was like, I mean, do the math. I have a 19-year-old. I mean, I can't be 25. So truth, integrity, I just have to just lean into that and hope that the opportunities I have and the experiences that I end up having are because I'm living my truth. Because at the end of the day, that's all I can do.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I really do. And I've never lied about my age either. I don't, it's funny, even if I wanted to lie about it or like just not even talk about it, it's so hard to do that because once I start talking about all the jobs I've had or experiences I have, it like adds up. People are like, wait, how old are you? What have you, like, how have you been doing all these different things? It's like, oh, I worked at MTV and then I was a stylist and then I was a TV host and then I was a blogger and now I'm an actor. And it's like, what are you, 105? Like, yeah. So I love that. I love that you're being that. I absolutely believe you're 100% right in the fact that we should own our age. And I love what you said that Oprah said, because it's almost like a badge of honor. It's like, yeah, I've been on this planet for this amount of time and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for all my experiences. But also it is okay to like want to look your best and want to do whatever it takes to look your best or feel your best.
But I mean, you are right that like in many ways it's flattering when people are like, girl, you look 32 or I would have guessed 35. But there is, of course, that stigma because it's like, yeah, like you always hear like the derogatory reference to 40s, right? It's never like, oh, you made it. It's not like celebrated. So that definitely exists. And like people think they're being really nice and I'll get DMs. No way. You look so young. But I'm like, it's like, but you are old. You look young, but I guess you're old, It
is such a backhanded compliment. And because I get the same thing. They're like, wait, what? You're 40. And I'm just like, guys, one, that's not that old, especially now in 2020 and technology and science. But also like, yeah, relax. Like it's okay. It's okay to age.
I mean, I don't know about you, and I always tell the younger girls this. I really do mean it when I say I love living in my skin now at this age far more than in my 20s. We know more, we've lived more. I think I try to grow and evolve. And I think I feel a lot more comfortable in my skin than I ever have. And that really is true.
Oh, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. And I also just feel like I just know more about what makes me happy, what I'm willing to accept or not accept. There's just like more of a confidence. I think personally, my 20s were all over the place. They were really fun, but they were also really chaotic and crazy. And then I think I started to level out in my 30s and started to figure out, maybe I want to do this versus this, or I'm no longer going to accept this versus that. And then my 40s really do feel like, okay, now I'm ready to take over the world.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready to kind of like do everything I've ever wanted to do and be confident in all my decisions and, still learning. Of course, you're always learning and evolving, but just this newfound confidence in what I want to do in my life or the rest of my life. Turning 40 is the big one. At least it was for me. It really feels like, if we're lucky, we live to 80 or later. So it really feels like this like halfway point, like, okay, this was my life the last 40 years. And now what's going to happen the next 40 years?
Yeah. And what a gift, right? I feel like that's just such a gift. And you're right. Like we can design it. And I feel similarly. I have less fear than I've ever had because I care less about all those other like judgments or criticisms, or I don't seek approval as much. Like it is nice. I feel like you come into your 40s and you just start to really, you live according to your own real desires and beliefs rather than living for everybody else in so many ways too. So it's nice.
That actually just made me think, if you're willing to talk about it, why and how you left E! News, because I feel like that decision you made was such an empowering move and maybe something you wouldn't have been brave enough to make in your 20s.
Totally. Oh, without question. You're so right. Yeah, maybe age was part of that. Sure. It has been 3 years now, believe it or not. But, it was about the time when, the Me Too movement was really like taking hold. I had been at E! for 12 years at this point, and I was covering a lot of the stories about the Me Too movement. And so, every day I was like reporting on these women coming forward and telling their stories and sharing their truth. Against all odds, by the way, like regardless of the backlash they might receive, regardless of how they would be perceived by telling their stories, it was like, enough was enough, right? And it was like, hey, I may never work again, or I may be, so many women had always been so afraid to come forward for all of the reasons and all of the ramifications that come when you speak out, right? So I was just reporting and in awe of so many women coming forward, at the same time finding out from a female executive at the time who told me in a closed door meeting that Jason Kennedy, who I had shared the screen with and the air with for those entire 12 years, so we got there at the same time, we were very good friends, but I had picked up another show. So I was doing 2 shows at the time. I was doing E! News at least 3 nights a week, sometimes more. And I was doing a new show called Daily Pop every single day. So I was getting more responsibility. I was getting more airtime. I had more, I was contributing more. And so I think it was, just a real heads up. She knew I was going into my negotiations because my contract was up at the end of the year. And she's like, you need to know you are severely underpaid comparatively. And so, so a light bulb went off and my investigative work kind of had to begin. But when I was able to confirm that was the truth, it was kind of one of those things where, all right, we ask for ballpark, we get comparable pay. This is a no-brainer. We go in and negotiate and ask for what I'm worth, because I knew it was an apples to apples situation. We'd been there the same amount of time. We could, similar hours, similar experience. To be honest, I'm older. I had 10 years local experience on top of that. So we were positioned at the network very much as like, a husband and wife, team in many ways. We were on red carpet. So I knew it's one thing, at your core, how things stand, the perception. So it was just such a no-brainer. And when they denied me of that, I had to make a decision. Would I stay or would I go? And so it was not an easy decision. It was a life-altering decision, and it required months of soul-searching and seeking the advice of my mentors. But at the end of the day, I had to leave because I knew I couldn't stay, knowing what I knew, knowing my worth, knowing, again, it was like that systematic, pervasive, gender inequality just like glaring at me. I was like, there's no difference between us other than he's the dude and he's in the boys club and he's playing golf with you guys, and all of you men are the ones making the decision here. So yeah, not to regurgitate the whole thing, because it was 3 years ago and I've talked about it so much, but I left, and it's been 3 years now, and that was about 10 days before even Time's Up became Time's Up. So to answer your question, no, I probably would not have had the strength or the courage to do that 10 years prior. I obviously wouldn't have had the experience either to maybe back it up at the time, but it was certainly, it was betting on myself. I had 2 kids to raise. I had to put the roof over our heads, that kind of thing. Like there was so much to consider, but I had to bet on me, and I had to make a stand for my beliefs. I had to walk the walk. So I left.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't think I knew so many of the specifics to it, but I'm like so proud of you still. I know it was 3 years ago, and I feel like even back then I was proud, but hearing more of the specifics, it's like, yeah, of course you absolutely did 100% the right thing, because also, how do you go back to work after that and work with this person and with these people who now know all this is out there in the air? It just wouldn't have been think, a conducive environment.
No, it would have been a disservice to my own soul. I would have been just feeling like I wasn't
not paid enough.
Yeah, I wouldn't be paid enough. I'd be like feeling like I was giving a discounted version of myself. I wouldn't have felt like, I would have been worse at my job. It was just, I wouldn't have been a team player. I would have just been bitter. And so I was like, we gotta make the move. And I will say this now though, Gracie, I mean, now that we are 3 years later, at the time, I was like so many other women, like I was just grinding for so many years, and I was a mom, and I had like a lot on my plate, and I knew I hustled and I worked really hard and I had a great work ethic, but I was not informed about, I didn't know much about the gender wage gap. I didn't know a lot about, inequalities out there. Here I am, a privileged white chick, right? So I was worried about my money, but my awareness was limited, right? Because I was kind of just looking right here out my front window and my little world and my little bubble. And when I left, it was like, suddenly I was like this poster child for gender pay inequality and the wage gap issues. Suddenly I was out there speaking on them and whatnot. So I was very honest saying like, listen, I couldn't have told you when equal pay day was last year. I didn't know about this stuff. Like suddenly I felt an obligation to learn about it. But if I have any regret about all of the times that I've spoken out about that, and I certainly have referenced this, but the intersectionality of all of that is so key. And so suddenly I have this voice, and I am glad that I used it, and I will continue to use it. But I know the stats, and the fact is, yes, white women are paid 80 cents on the dollar compared to men, but it is so much more devastatingly worse for women of color. And I, of course, knew that, and I would say that, and I know that, Latinos are paid 60 something cents on the dollar, and Black women 50 something cents on the dollar. That was part of the conversation. But now today, knowing what I now know even more so through the times we are living, I'm like, I saw this meme, and it was like the perfect, I don't know if it's a meme or just like, it was like a cartoon, and it shows the white woman standing there like, and her hands are in the air, and the white man's on top of her. So she's like holding the patriarchy up, right? Like she's like being smashed by him, but right below her is a Black woman holding her up, it's just like the trickle of the oppression is like, it's so real and it is so relevant. So I just want to say, as I continue to speak out about pay inequality, it's important, but it's not just my problem. It's not just my little story. It's not my discrimination. It's discrimination, but I have to represent all women, and it's even worse for others, even more, far more than myself. So
yeah. Well, thank you for acknowledging that. That's huge. And it's so interesting. Ugh. I mean, it makes me like when you were saying that, my stomach started like getting like icky, because I was just like, oh yeah, this fucking sucks. I think things are changing, and I feel like, what's happening right now definitely does feel more like a movement, rather than a moment, as people are saying. And it is interesting to have that perspective now, 3 years later, to be like, oh shit. It's funny, you said something similar to earlier about this like naivete, because you are such a like positive light. Like you're so fun to be around. You kind of radiate this really positive energy, which is probably, I would say, why you are so good at your job and so good at interviewing celebrities, because you make people feel at ease. Can you speak more on that, and like how has that evolved a little now that you're older, or do you still feel this like? Because I almost feel like it's a positive thing, this like naivete in a sense. It's almost this innocence within, but then also the older you get, the more you learn, the more you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, that's really interesting, especially right now and what I'm going through. Yes, I think it's a positive. I definitely believe like my energy, my outlook has served me very, very well in life. I definitely believe that I've manifested a lot of really great experiences and opportunities because I just have these blinders on, and I refuse to be negative or be like, maybe it's naivete, but it's definitely served me. With the times we're going through, with having gone through, the thing that will now forever be a part of my narrative, and going through even personal situations. I'm going through quite the breakup right now after 3 years of being with someone. And there is a bit of an awakening going on, which is I can't afford to be too ignorant anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I can't afford to be naive. If I want to be whole, and that actually came to mind when you said, you know, what are you blank enough? Like, I was like, maybe I'm not whole enough. And that's what I'm working on right now, is through meditation and reading and reading everything. I'm talking like, you know, the Pema Chodron meditative books of the world. I'm talking about educating myself on white privilege. Like, I want to be whole, but I also don't want to be taken advantage of. So I'm really working on not allowing people to feast on that goodness. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, that makes so much sense. And thank you for sharing about your breakup, because I did not know that. So
that's fun to go through during a pandemic also. Let me tell you, it's like when it rains, it pours.
That makes complete sense. And I love coming to because, you know, for each episode, we do try to title it according to the conversation. We've kind of been jumping around places and it's all been beautiful, but I do love the not whole enough sentiment, because that does kind of encapsulate everything we've been talking about. That's such a universal feeling. I mean, so much of us feel that emptiness, or that piece of something's missing, and maybe we try to get it through work, or we try to get it through relationships, or we try to get it through kids, or this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, I think we realize we can only get it within ourselves. And that's the only way we're going to feel that wholeness. And that takes time sometimes. And that takes working on ourselves and reading and meditating and taking care of our bodies and all those things. So yeah, I love that you got to that point.
I think that's what it is. I really do. It is work, but nobody is going to make you whole. It's not the whole Jerry Maguire, you complete me thing. Like, no person's going to make you whole. No drug is going to make you whole. No amount of money is going to make you whole. You have to do the work. I have to do the work. And I'm kind of tying it back to some of it's odd that I've been so like positive my whole life, because, you know, I did, like I said, we had some real bumps in my childhood, and I definitely had some traumatic experiences. I think it was like a coping mechanism to just be good, do good. You know, it was like the cheerleader syndrome, they call it, where it's like, if you're happy enough and if you can just cling to that, then life won't suck as bad. So it's kind of like a choice. It's almost like just a numbness to just like, if I'm happy, then I can't feel all that shit, you know? So
oh, totally.
It's like undoing that a little bit, unlearning that, and at least just making it a more healthy way to approach day to day, and know that those highs, all those things I just mentioned, are not going to be the answer. You are always the answer. Your being is the answer. And it's like refamiliarizing yourself with your truest spirit. And so I know that sounds super meta, but I do believe that's where the real peace is. And I'm working on it. I'm finding it. And we may be working on this till we are 80, Gracie, you know, like, and that's okay, right? That's okay.
That is okay. And we are similar in that sense that, like, you know, I've been seeing my therapist for 2 years now, and I love her. And I have that similar thing. For me, it's less of a positive outlook on life or a positive attitude. And for me, it's more just, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm always fine. Everything is always fine. And that's always been my way of coping with, you know, the stuff that happened during childhood. My parents also broke up when I was like 2. And, you know, I had some other stuff happening in my childhood that wasn't great. And then growing up and dealing with relationships and jobs and this, that, and the other, I very much have that outlook of, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like, I can get through anything. That also kind of ties in, I think, to like what people have been talking about a lot lately with the, I guess, stereotype or notion that Black women, women of color, Latin women too, are stronger, or, you know, they're the strong Black woman that's always fine and always okay. And really kind of accepting that, you know, that's one, not true. And two, you can be a strong woman and still have horrific days, or be sad, or be, you know, depressed or lonely, or whatever the case may be.
Right. It's almost like it's not fair. It's like that you have to carry the weight of being strong. I mean, I kind of feel that too sometimes, like this resentment. It's like, I don't want to always have it together or be the strong one. But like, yeah, you have to be permitted to feel your feelings.
Well, this was lovely. Can you tell our audience what you have going on now? I know you have your wonderful podcast, so please plug that, but anything else that you have and you want to share?
Yeah, I've having worked for a corporation all those years, I'm really building my own business now. And so I have a production company, and the most integral part of that right now has been my podcast. It's called Naked. And the premise is just to kind of really strip down your armor, much like the conversation you and I just had, to have meaningful conversations with other women that make people feel less alone in their own struggles. And so I just love this vulnerability, like the space you've created, Gracie. Like, I am here for it all day long. I think it just, if we can all continue to connect like this, it's great, because we just, again, like, we feel it's that permission again to just be ourselves, come as we are, all our crap, all our highs, all our lows, the whole beautiful tornado of it is nothing to hide from. So yeah, Naked a Pod. I'm on a couple week hiatus, kind of retooling it, but it's been around for a year. So if you haven't heard it, there are 50 plus some episodes. I do it every week. It's great. I have a couple TV shows in development. Can't really talk about those now because it's taking forever, and now everything's shut down, sadly. So not much to promote there other than come follow me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram all the time. I am Catt Sadler.
I love you, Catt. Thank you so much for doing this.
It is such my pleasure. You're wonderful at it. Keep it up. I can't wait to see what else you do at this.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Blank Enough. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. And follow us on Instagram at NotBlankEnoughPod. Until next time, thank you for listening. Check the show notes for links and info about today's guest. This episode was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and recorded remotely. Our show today was produced by Gracie Mercedes and Dave Hill and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.